Hey everyone, welcome back to Page Chewing on the Incredible Steve Talks Books channel. Um, I am P.L. Stuart, Steve's co-host. I'm honored to be here, and we're both honored to have another incredible guest on our show, and that is Thorn Coyle. So welcome.
Hello.
Thorn, thanks so much for joining us. Um, I'll give Thorn an opportunity to kind of more introduce herself and talk about who she is and what she writes and what she does. So that's okay. I'll turn over to you, Thorn.
Great. My name is T. Thorn Coyle, Thorn to my friends, and I'm actually non binary, so I go by any pronouns, but mostly they, them. And I write a lot. I've written since I was a small child. And of course, books saved my life, got me out of a not dreadful, difficult childhood, like a lot of us. And I loved escaping into other people's worlds and my own worlds. And now I started off writing poetry, wrote some plays, had poetry published, did a lot of journalism. And then I was practicing fiction, but I was in the phase of I kept giving up. I was working too hard at it. So I walked away from fiction for quite a while and started publishing nonfiction. I traditionally published three nonfiction books on spiritual practice, and I traveled the world and taught all of that for many years. And then finally, fiction came knocking on my door again, and I've been going gangbusters with it ever since and having a great time. And you can see some of the fruits of my labor behind me. I just write a lot, and I love it. And I write in a lot of different genres, but mostly I write about something that has to do with magic and or justice. My tagline is magic is real and justice is worth fighting for. And that imbues really all my writing, fiction and nonfiction. So
Phenomenal.
that's my intro.
Yeah, phenomenal. I,
What's your favorite genre to write in? Do you have a favorite or one that you is your like your comfort genre that you enjoy the most?
Well, it has shifted. I love anything that's fantasy related, although I also write historical and science fiction short stories.
Hmm.
But for longer form, I prefer anything that has a fantasy element. So I started off writing a lot of urban fantasy, and I have also written some epic fantasy action adventure novels. But since the pandemic, what I've been writing are paranormal cozy mysteries.
Hmm.
Years and years ago, started reading cozy mysteries when I needed a break. And there's just something about the intensity of the world lately that retreating into that kind of lighter, a little bit slower, um, a little bit lower stakes fiction has really been soothing to my subconscious, I think. And so right now I'm working on a brand new series with two gay men and their corgis in the little gay village within the city, and all the wacky cast of characters. And I'm having a great time with it. It's called Pride Street, and I'll launch that on Kickstarter next month. Um, but my earlier pandemic series is the Seashell Cove Paranormal Mysteries about a bookshop owning witch and her black cat. Who doesn't like witches, cats, and bookstores? So that's been really fun. So yeah, the pandemic shifted everything, and add in the fact that I also had suffered a brain injury and needed a break from more complex fiction for a while. When my brain started healing, the cozy mysteries just seemed to flow really well.
Hmm.
So I've been cutting loose and having a great time.
It's something we've talked about recently about the rise of cozy fantasy, like Legends and Lattes and some other books like
Yeah.
that are picking even older books that have been around. They're picking up steam now because people seem to be, have a craving for something lighter and, like you said, not as high of stakes. That's kind of what we were discussing is, you know, the state of the world and everything going on. It's nice to just get away and have something fun to dig your teeth into.
The world is hard, and it's a great thing about movies and TV shows and books is it can offer us respite from the world, a little break from the day-to-day grind that everyone's in right now. But I know for other people, like author Tananarive Due talks about, for her mother and herself, horror is their escape. Horror is how they make sense of the world and how they get a rest. And while I can really appreciate a lot of horror, that is not a rest for me. So I'm glad there's a wide variety. But yeah, the rise of cozy fantasy. I hadn't heard those two words put together, but you're right. That is a subgenre. I think it just hasn't been named very well before.
Yeah, I mean, and all your work sounds fascinating, Thorn, and definitely I plan to get into some of it. A lot is on my TBR. I think Steve, as soon as he found out that your one of your books, one of your series was the Steel Clan series was described as something like I think it was Xena Warrior Princess meets Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah.
I knew he was in.
Yeah.
So was I. So and Steve is funny you speak about horror. Steve's the one that's got me more into horror because he's a horror aficionado and stuff. But I'm very fascinated to hear about, especially all your books, but your Steel Clan series in particular sounds really intriguing. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Or
Yeah. So the Steel Clan saga, I had this image of a group of anarchist knights with their swords and pole arms and battle axes on motorcycles, riding through a landscape that it's what they say has gone to green, because it's post-apocalyptic, but it's post-apocalyptic far enough in the future that vegetation has pulled most of the cities down. A lot of the highways are cracking, and humans have formed little enclaves and settlements, and are just trying to get along. And so they live in a township called Go No More because their ancestors said, this is a good place to stop. So we're going no more. This is our township. And so it's an anarchist collective. I had a lot of fun figuring out what technology they would have, what technology wouldn't work. There's not easy access to black powder, so there aren't guns. Mostly that's because I didn't want to write guns. I didn't want guns in my series, so I wanted swords. But they've got biofuels, so they can have motorcycles, right? And they've got a river, so they can have hydropower. And the other fun thing I had with it was I got to write this post-apocalyptic, anarchistic kind of landscape, and it's fantasy without the feudalism, which I really like. The feudal order, not cool. I'm not into kings and queens. I want people helping each other and figuring out how life works, right? But I also wanted dragons, and I also wanted elves, and I wanted there to be giant condors flying in the sky again, because of course the condors have returned and the bison have returned. And the other thing I wanted to write was the elves under Hill are my big bads, right? Because they're royalty and they follow more of a feudal order. So it's kind of a clash between the feudal order and this contemporary collectivism, anarchist vision of a future. So I always say I write the world I want to live in, and that's true for all of my books. From the Panther Chronicles, where shapeshifters are confronting the FBI with magic, to the Witches of Portland, where they're running through the city, confronting evil developers or fascists with magic. And Steel Clan Saga is the same way. It's kind of my fantasy, my epic fantasy post-apocalyptic vision of the world I want to live in.
I just see a comment from Austin.
Austin, agreed. That's badass.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Austin. That's like, wow. Now I really want to read it. It sounds incredible. Wow. So in all that, you did mention, a big part of your life, and I'm assuming impacting your writing also is spirituality. What aspects of spirituality? I see, from the back, in your display there, along with your books. Perhaps Wiccan element. Can you talk about the spirituality aspect?
Yeah, my first published book was called Evolutionary Witchcraft. So I taught, and I do still teach, although I've backed way off from that. I taught paganism, spiritual practice, magic, and self-development work, will development, being more effective in the world. I've got a book called Sigil Magic for writers, artists, and other creatives about using sigils and magical practice to help our creativity flow more easily. So basically, I'm a proponent of daily practice, and daily practice of any kind helps build the foundation of our lives, right? It helps us build good habits. It supports our creativity, supports all the other stuff we want to do. So whether that's exercise for you or meditation or a prayer practice or going for walks or daily morning pages, I always have encouraged people to develop something that works for them in their lives so that we're not always starting from zero every day, right? It's kind of like the more you write, the more you write. The more you exercise, the more you can exercise. It's the same with spiritual practice. So it definitely supports it. I think it's one of the reasons I'm able to write so much, because I had all these years of spiritual practice. I used to say, if you master one thing, you can master anything. And I still believe that's true.
Incredible.
Just want to say hi really quickly to John. Thanks for coming
Hey,
by.
John.
Hey, John.
And Jade had a comment. I used to listen to Thorn Coyle's podcast all the time. Such amazing stuff with great music, too.
Thank you, Jade. Yeah, my old podcast, Elemental Castings, which no longer is available anywhere. I keep meaning to put it up on Bandcamp.
What was the podcast all about?
The podcast, it was called Elemental Castings, and I would interview a wide variety of magic workers and spiritual practitioners. And it was similar to this podcast. We would just have free-ranging conversations for an hour, and I had a lot of great guests on. It was really fun and very fruitful for a long time.
And speaking of your music, you have 4 albums that you've
Yeah.
released. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so my first 2 albums, gosh, they came out a long time ago because I'm in my mid-50s. I've been doing everything for a long time. My first one was Face of a New Day. Second is Give Us a Kiss. And that's all kind of rock, folk, combo, pop, whatever. A lot of political activism stuff is enmeshed in it because that infuses a lot of what I do. And then I also came out with 2 CDs of chants and songs for the Pagan Wheel of the Year with my friend Sharon Knight. So those are songs for the waning year and songs for the strengthening sun. And then I've also released just a few random songs, which are kind of more techno dance music, but also pagan and magic. And those are on Bandcamp. You can find all those on Bandcamp.
You're multi-talented. Wow, that's incredible. It's amazing.
Yeah, I also used to be a semi-professional dancer.
What? What kind of dancing?
I did belly dance many years ago. Gosh, when in my late 20s, I was in a dance troupe for 7 years. Performed all through San Francisco.
Wow.
And we performed at like tattoo conventions before everyone was getting tattooed, that kind of thing. It was really fun.
That's quite the interesting life you've been leading.
I really have. I've lived a very full, amazing life, and I'm grateful for it. One example I give is I say I spent 4 years working on the Pacific Stock Exchange, learning about our economic system, which is based on gambling and greed, as you probably know. I spent 4 years working full-time as a peep show dancer. And then I spent 4 years working full-time in a soup kitchen. That kind of encapsulates a lot of who I am and what I do. It runs the gamut.
Yeah, I did notice that on your bio about working in a woman-run peep show. I wanted to ask you. I bet you have lots of stories from that experience.
I do. I used to have. There was one customer who used to come in to discuss science fiction with me, in between, putting quarters in the slot for the windows to go up and down, and I would crouch by the window, and we'd discuss science fiction books. And he was the one who gave me a copy of V for Vendetta. That was how I got turned on to V for Vendetta, was a customer at the Peep Show. Another thing I loved to do was crouch at the window and ask people who their favorite ecstatic poet was. That was always good for a shock. And I would play a trick on frat boys when they'd come in. I would ask them to recite the Greek alphabet, and they'd always start and then catch themselves and get pissed off, which amused me a lot. But I got to dance in a mirrored room full of naked women for a living. It was pretty great, and it was all behind glass, so I didn't have to interact with anyone. Yeah,
that sounds awesome.
A great way to make a living in your 20s. Yeah. Austin, the post-apocalyptic series is the Steel Clan Saga, and the book one is We Seek No Kings. So it's we seek no kings, we heed no laws, we bend no knee.
Just the titles are epic. I love the titles.
Thanks.
The titles are
I
epic.
also, the artist Valerie Herron did amazing character art for the covers. I love my covers.
Yeah, I've seen your covers. They're phenomenal. I cannot wait to get that series. That's definitely in the 2023 plans for sure. It's,
I really love. I issued those in large print hardback, and the hardcovers are just delicious. They're just nice artifacts. Okay. I love holding them.
I love my hardcovers, so
yeah,
that'll fit really well.
And has it been the same artist for all of your books?
No, I hired Valerie specifically for Steel Clan Saga. Lou of Cover Affairs did my Witches of Portland series, and then I did the update of my Panther Chronicles series, and I've done my Seashell Cove series, and I do all my short story collection covers. I love book design. Cover design is something that I really enjoy, and it kind of gives my brain a break from the writing. Yeah, so I do my own covers, which is a lot of fun. Wow. And so that's what I did. I hired Valerie for the character art, and then I designed the covers for the Steel Clan series.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I know one thing that's John said.
Great titles.
Thanks, John.
Awesome titles.
Thanks, Austin.
Yeah,
I like them too.
Yeah, those titles are phenomenal. What I was going to say is I know it's important to you and to manage to see in fiction non-gender conforming characters, more queer characters. Like, how are we doing with fiction in general with seeing more representation? BLPC and queer, non-gender. Like, how are we getting there slowly but surely? Are you seeing more?
It's, as it's still hard, and I think the indie world is making greater inroads because it's easier for those of us who aren't necessarily members of the ruling classes to put our own voices out there. As a queer person, I love having a wide variety of characters in my books. I love all kinds of queer characters. I try to get as much racial diversity in my books as possible too, because that's the world I live in. I don't live in a white world, despite living in the Pacific Northwest now. I came from the Oakland-Berkeley border to Portland, which was a shock. But, there's diversity everywhere if we bother to look for it. So I think, and, the indie world is also doing better with a variety of sexualities, a variety of, neurodivergent representation, all of that sort of thing. And I think traditional publishing is still dropping the ball like they are, because their whole power structure is still the old school power structure. And so if you don't have diversity in your editorial team, you're not going to have diverse books. You're going to have tokenism, and you're going to have all the issues that we see of, diversity seen through like a white lens or a straight heterosexual lens, that sort of thing. How about you? What do you think? Do you see a split between diversity in indie published books versus traditional?
Sadly, I do, and the first time I saw characters who used pronouns such as they was in indie. I've seen maybe one book, fiction, fantasy book, like mainstream fantasy book, that's used those pronouns. And as
Yeah.
for writers of color and racialized writers, I mean, um, I really think that although there's huge writers from the queer community and from diverse racialized backgrounds in traditional public writing, humongous, right? Tamsin Muir and Tessa Gratton and the Pete Shelley Clarks and N.K. Jemisin. Like there's so many. However, there's still, I think, it's almost still this divide, because seeing what they've gone through, especially to deal with the literary establishment and even when they're getting awards, people battling and say they don't deserve it's just some horrific stuff, right? So but yeah, I totally concur, Thorn, that I think indie is a space where you can write any story, you can
Yep.
write it the way you want, and you don't have to second guess or think about anything other than, once you find your audience, you're going
Yep.
to sell books. People are going to love your work. They're going to keep asking for more, and you keep writing them the way you want to, with the kind of representation you want. So I really, really, really love that aspect about indie. And I want to hear from Steve too. Like, I wrote a book basically and a series from the viewpoint of a white, bigoted, racist, homophobic, colonialist, misogynistic prince, right? And no traditional publisher would ever touch that coming from a racialized writer. Are you kidding me? There's no way. Obviously I wrote it for a reason, but yeah, so like I don't think, other than indie, um, and even going future forward, I still don't know if we're going to see the depth of of, of writing of that type in traditional publishing. I just don't. I can't see it happening. Steve, I don't know what you think, but
Well, first, just let me answer Austin's question. PL is published and is a book drawn in right here behind me. A great audiobook. Just want to plug that. It's the first audiobook that's kept my attention in a long time.
thank you,
So
Steve.
just want to mention that. But as far as the indie world versus the trad world, I think traditional publishing reminds me in its current state of what the music industry was in the late 90s.
Yes.
They're stuck in their old ways and it's worked for so long, and now things aren't working. Technology and everything is bringing us new opportunities for people who just want to write a book. They have an entry that they didn't necessarily have before. So I think they're still hanging on to that old structure. And I think they're like a big lumbering idiot when it comes to their whole, the whole business is just going to take some time to recognize all the things that indie is doing, whether it's representation or this kind of stories being published or a variety of things. I think they'll catch up. It'll just take them too long, or longer than it should, because it's a big, they have a lot of moving parts, and they're just not interested until they see so many great indie books and so much attention being paid to them. Then they'll let it go off, and it may be too late. I'm just waiting for someone like Stephen King or someone who has a huge following to go indie. That's what I want. So that would be great.
Well, Brandon Sanderson is making
Yeah.
forays into that.
Just want to say
He's
that. Yeah.
he's hybrid. He's both trad pubbed and doing indie publishing as well. So it's happening, definitely. And I see more and more traditionally published authors doing that kind of hybrid thing. And, my first 3 books are traditionally published, my first 3 nonfiction books. I can't imagine going back because I love the freedom. And I also love the ability to directly connect to my audiences. I want that connection with people who actually are interested in hearing what I have to say. I've got a story about that. When I first started writing the Cozy Mysteries, I had a few cozy author friends check my cozy levels, because I'd read a lot, but I wasn't used to writing them. And one of them said, yeah, your cozy level, the tone is just right, but cozy readers tend to be more traditional, and you've got this non-binary side character, and I was like, I don't care. And so I marketed it on my Kickstarter as Cozy Mysteries for Freaks and Geeks. And I took in 8 grand on that campaign, my very first campaign, because clearly people want cozy mysteries for freaks and geeks. They want D&D playing computer programmers and queer people and Black SCA members, and along with the centaurs and fairy creatures and witches that populate the world, right? I think almost everyone can find an audience, and that's fabulous. And you don't have to sell hundreds of thousands of books anymore. You just need to find the people who want to connect to you and you want to connect with. And that's really liberating.
John had a comment that I wanted to get both of your opinions on. Side note, I also think some people are afraid of being diverse in fear of doing it incorrectly, but you think traditional would have the resources to avoid that. And I spoke to an author recently, and they had written a story, and I forget what I think it was religion that they were writing about, but they didn't publish it because they were worried that they would get something wrong or misrepresent something. What's a way for what have some of the things both of you have done to avoid that or to make sure you represent it correctly?
Well, my first published series came out of, I was in a writing workshop with Christine Catherine Rush and turned in a short story on, deadline, like the same day. It was one of those you have to write while you're there. And I had always asked myself the question, what would have happened if Fred Hampton hadn't been assassinated by the FBI and the Chicago police? The world would have changed, right? So I wrote a short story about that. And during the feedback session, Chris said, I hate to tell you, but this is a novel. And I hate to tell you, it's actually a series. And I was like, no way am I going to write that. But the characters insisted. And so what I did was I asked 2 friends of mine, if I do this exchange with you, will you be a first reader and make sure that I'm not doing things egregiously, I'm getting the tone right? And every step of the way with every book, I considered not even publishing them. And those readers said, no, we love these characters, we want these books. And then I also got an activist friend of mine who was part of the Chicano moratorium in Los Angeles in the 70s. That's comes into the series as well. And he also read those sections that had to do with that. And he said something that almost made me cry. He said it made him proud to read about what he had lived through this fantasy lens. So I basically hired experts who were friends of mine to give me a read and to just say, will you just check this? Because it's not my culture. I mean, I'm not only writing about, I'm also writing about white people there. And I'm also, got to have a lot of fun with the scenery chewing horrible J. Edgar Hoover, who was an evil magician. That was such fun to write. So there is diversity, but I needed to make sure, excuse me, that I wasn't overstepping. And I also expected I was going to get pushback when the books were published. And I have, but surprisingly very little. It's kind of amazing to me. And then in the Steel Clan saga, I have a primary character who's a wheelchair user and an amputee. And I asked an amputee person, I paid them to do an expert read for me. And they gave me some feedback. I made some changes. So you hire an expert on ballistics for your books, hire an expert or do a trade on any of this. And now you'll notice I'm using the term expert reader and not sensitivity reader. I loathe the term sensitivity reader. I think it has become a big mess. I think it has become this, social justice warrior language thing. And it's become a way to discount it and diminish it, when really all we're doing is saying, if you don't know, you hire someone who knows, or you do a fair trade with someone who knows. So I could go on and on about that. I'm hope I'm not ranting too much, but
No.
PL, what do you have to say about it?
No, I completely agree, and I love the fact that you raised that term sensitivity. I too have recently, only in the last year or two, started to take umbrage with that particular term because of the connotation that it seemed to carry throughout the age of, you know, unfortunately backlash against, some all well-intentioned things relating to especially diversity. And I love expert because it lends that credence, that credibility, like expert witness, for i.e. Forensic expert witness. And I love that because it is drawing someone's expertise, and that's really important. And I did the same thing. For I'm not a member of the LGBT plus community. However, I have lots of friends who are, obviously, and I've drawn on people like Bjorn Larson, a great member of the community, just a brilliant writer and dear friend. He's been on PAGE in the past for to get to adequately and to properly get my characters who were from that community down the way, depicting them the way they deserve, and the issues and their issues. Same with, and even though I'm racialized, some of my friends who are, so TL Coughlin, again, Steve, another great writer who we've had on the show, reaching to her about, and getting feedback, just like Lauren said, and getting that there's sometimes that difficult feedback that's hard to hear. Say, hey, have you considered this, and this might be offensive? Are you looking at this part of the lens that someone from this background will look for? And those are critical conversations to have. Expert readers are so invaluable.
Yeah.
And I can't put enough emphasis on how valuable they are. But realizing at the same time, though, that even with a plethora of expert readers, you still may get something wrong.
Yeah.
So that's something important to realize too. You still may get something wrong, and if you do, you need to go stand up and say, "Hey, you know what? I got that wrong. Mea culpa, and do better next time."
Right.
So that's we are not going to be perfect as authors or as people, and we're going to miss things, and we're going to be ignorant to certain things. But I think when we approach things with the right ethics and the right intention, that more times than not, we're probably going to get it closer to right than not. So, and I think if we keep striving for that continuous improvement as writers, and along with that, keep striving for that authenticity in our work and that authenticity in our representation, and we keep growing that way, then we're on the right track, right? And that's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. So
yeah. And some people say, oh, I'm so afraid of getting it wrong because I'll get dragged on Twitter. And it's like, that's not a great attitude to approach your creative process with. I approach it all as study, as research, as I want to know more. And I do want to be respectful. And the other thing to remember is no culture or subculture is a monolith.
No.
Some people are going to love what you do and some people are going to hate it. And that's fine. And we also need to remember to ask the question, am I doing diversity for diversity's sake? Or am I really trying to be authentic to my world and the voices of my characters in my world? Everything arises from that. And do I just have empathy for other human beings? Empathy goes a long way in writing our characters and in creating our worlds. Too many authors, I think, are afraid of getting it wrong. And I say, I hope you reframe your attitude around it and say, I'd like to learn something. Like that is a more generative, creative attitude. I also want to bring up quickly a case in which I had an expert reader who gave me feedback that actually caused me to take out one facet of my character. I was writing a character that I thought had social anxiety. And so I wrote to this other author and said, you talk about having social anxiety. Would you give this a read? And she came back and said, this character does not have social anxiety. Like the way she's going out to nightclubs and interacting with people, and I would be like under my bed at home. I went, oh, okay, that clearly I completely misread. And so I had to go back and dive back into the character and say, what is actually going on with this character? So it enriched my story to take that out, actually. It enriched my story to have someone say, you got that wrong. So I was appreciative. And it's some of my fans' favorite book now. My book by Moon in The Witches of Portland. People love that character. And Celine does not have social anxiety.
And Austin had a comment. I would have never thought about writing books, but after watching Brandon Sanderson's lectures, as well as listening to other discussions with people such as yourselves, I feel inspired to do so. What advice would you give to someone who is on that edge of, I really want to write, but I'm not sure how to start or where to go? Where would you point them?
Well, Brandon Sanderson's lectures are a fantastic way to start. I rewatch those periodically. I get so much out of the Sanderson lectures. But the main thing is just start writing and let yourself practice. It's one thing that writers have trouble with, and that is just saying, I'm just practicing. I'm having fun. I'm creating worlds, and I don't ever have to even do anything with them. You know, just like a potter throws 1,000 pots, we can write 1,000 stories, and it can just be for our pleasure and enjoyment. And the more we do that, the more our subconscious comes out to play. And of course, the better we get. So I always encourage people to set a schedule. And it doesn't matter what it is. If you have a half an hour every Tuesday and Thursday, then you sit down and you write. And I really love timed sprints. Timed sprints help me a lot. As soon as the timer's going, all I'm doing is writing. I'm not daydreaming. I'm not doing a bunch of research. I'm not dithering. I'm not editing. I'm just getting words down. And that gets the story flowing. There's a writer, M.L. Buckman, talks about, there's a concept in air travel called the ground effect, you know, where you go to land, and if you stay just above the ground, you just keep going with no effort. And it's the same with writing or any craft. The more you do it, you just keep going, and then you take off again, because you don't have to keep stopping and starting and stopping and starting. So get some kind of a routine, make some kind of commitment to yourself, and then have fun.
Yeah, it's amazing. I want to touch on one of the things that you had mentioned, Thorn, about you mentioned, being more accessible as a writer in the indie sphere versus the traditional sphere, and you were traditionally published originally. So, what are the barriers to being accessible as a traditionally published writer versus being an indie writer that you found?
Are you saying, I'm not sure, you're using the word accessible, and I'm not sure what the context is. I probably said something and now I don't remember.
Okay, so my apologies. Yeah, so it sounded, and correct me if I'm wrong, the impression you gave me, and I may have misunderstood, was that as an indie writer, you're more accessible to your audience and your readers, making direct connection as opposed to being a traditionally published writer. So what are the barriers being a traditionally published writer, since you've been both, that you see with traditionally published writers versus indie writers in general? What's that barrier towards being as accessible to your readers?
I think what I was talking about was, it's easier for me as an indie author to connect directly to this small subset that wants what I have. I don't have to please hundreds of thousands of people, which is what traditional publishing wants, because their bottom line needs you to please hundreds of thousands of people. And if you don't out the gate, you don't get another book contract. That's what I'm talking about, right? So I have a chance to let my relationship with my readers grow over time. And it's really hard to do these days for a traditionally published author. I think it's almost impossible, because like I said, if you're not a huge success out the gate, you're done. Like, they dust their hands. If your book doesn't sell out, doesn't earn out within 3 months, you're done. Whereas I don't have to earn out within 3 months. Actually, I do, because my costs are so minuscule, right? Because the technology is so awesome now. Costs have gone way down to produce books. But I can say, I'm having fun with this series. I want to give it a chance and see where it goes. And then, oh, look, lo and behold, 4 books in, more and more readers are finding it. And I'm finding more and more ways to connect with them on social media and through my weekly newsletter. And they're now interested in me. And oh, now they've joined my Patreon. And right. So we've got all these interactions, right now, with my paid weekly newsletter and my Patreon supporters. I'm doing Write With Me Saturdays. Whoever wants to show up can write with me for an hour Saturday mornings. And it's just fun, and as a traditional author, I think it's harder to find those ways to connect because your publisher just doesn't give you a chance. That's the main thing. We have a chance to grow a career.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's sad because, I have so much respect for so many of my traditionally published friends and the work that they do and
Me too.
and the efforts they put in. I believe, and we've talked about this, Steve and I and other guests on previous page chewing, that more and more of the promotional marketing side seems to be being downloaded on them, as opposed to in the past where at least the perception was more about just writing your books and keeping up with your deadlines and things. But now it's more and more of you having to do a lot of the promotion stuff that's more associated with being an indie author. And so you kind of wonder, as you said, with the pressure to earn out and everything else, and even things like zero-sum advances coming, and it's for some of my friends who, like, what's the better route, right? I guess it's the route that fits best for you. So I'm not trying to completely traditional publishing, because again, there's lots of successful traditionally published authors, but I know for me, at least for me, and you have a distinct advantage over me where you've done both. Of course, one was more not, your traditional published books are more nonfiction, if you right. So different. But again, you have an advantage over someone like me because you've lived in both worlds, so you've seen both worlds. You know the differences. You can say, emphatically, these are the differences, right? And these are advantages versus disadvantages. So, but for me, it's just I think this is my fit. I'm not saying never, say never. And I don't know if you're also planning to dip back and forth and maybe be traditionally published again and publish some series traditionally and keep some self, or but you can do that now. That's the beauty of there's no hard and fast. If you have a series that you think that will fit the traditional market, you can write it, and hopefully someone like you would have an agent and get published. And if you want to keep publishing indie, you can do that. And so that's the beauty of the whole landscape now, is that you can mix and match, and
Yeah, and there are people doing it successfully. I mean, we already mentioned Brandon Sanderson is dipping his toes in the indie waters. Gail Carriger now does a lot of indie work. She started as traditional, and of course, a lot of her catalog is still traditional, but she's doing a lot of indie work. P.N. Elrod is now doing indie stuff. So there's also writers who had a strong background and a strong career in traditional publishing whose their careers kind of died because publishing trends change, people don't want them anymore. They're now able to take their back catalog if they were lucky enough. Contracts, that's the other thing. Contracts, it used to be easier to get your rights back. Now you can't get your rights back. They just want your IP for their bottom line. You're never getting your copyright back if you're traditionally published, which is one reason I probably won't do that ever again. But they can get their rights back. And now their old books that are 20, 30 years old, 40 years old can find a new audience, which is fantastic, And that just was not possible even 5 years ago.
It must be so soul crushing to write a book, to query it, to get it published, and then wait a year or two for them to publish it, and then they drop you a few months later. That must be awful to go through something like that. John did have a question. He said, if this is too personal, feel free to ignore. but his question was, did you feel it easier to achieve sales and audience through traditional publishing? Or have you found more success with indie? I think you've already kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I have found, as PL mentioned, my traditionally published books were nonfiction, so it is a different audience. And I also knew going in, I didn't want to write a book a year in nonfiction. I only had so much to say. I wrote 3 big books, said what I needed to. Since then, I've come out with 2 smaller subject books in nonfiction. And those I would not have been able to sell in traditional publishing. They would have wanted me to pad them out, make them bigger and longer so they could jack up the price, right? So my audience was different. But when I was, and one of the reasons I went back to writing fiction was because of the indie revolution. I was like, I don't want to wait 3 years to get one book published. I have a lot of stories to tell. And so I already had an audience and a platform that I had cultivated relationships with for decades. And I said to them, here's the deal. I had stopped blogging and people were saying, I miss your blog. We miss, your weekly or monthly stuff. And I said, here's your deal. I'll start a Patreon and you have to agree to read 1 essay and 1 short story every month, right? So I trained my audience that I already had a relationship with to start reading my magical fiction. And so I do have crossover from my old audience. But that said, it's only in the last year that I've had a surge, an upsurge of brand new people who didn't know my old work at all, who are discovering my fiction. This is kind of a roundabout way to answer your question. I think that as long as you are a person who's willing and able to try to connect, you can find an audience no matter what. And I see highly successful indie authors who have a much easier time gaining an audience and connecting with fans and with readers than traditionally published people do. Now, I also know I have traditionally published friends who also, have fans and loyal readers and all the rest. But I actually think these days, because of the flexibility of indie, in a lot of ways, we just have more creative opportunities to connect with people. And for me, everything that other people call marketing, I call connection, right? Years ago, author Joanna Penn said, oh, Thorn is really good at content marketing. I was like, I am? Oh, it's because I post interesting articles and I post photographs from my walks. All that is considered content marketing. I just didn't know it. I just think I want to connect with people. I'm a storyteller. I'm, spinning visions of a world. So, again, I'm not sure if this is directly answering your question, but I think if you're passionate about something, you can always find a way to connect. And whether you're traditionally published or independently published, I think it doesn't matter now. I think there's been a true democratization of art, and it's still ongoing, and I love it.
Well, I mean, this has been really fascinating. Thorn, it's amazing talking to you. We could probably go on for hours. We do want to respect your time, so we should probably start wrapping up shortly. But before we start doing that, do you mind letting people know, what your preferred social media platforms are, how best to get a hold of you, where to find your works, your books, things like that? Can you let us know, please?
Yeah, so the main way to contact me is my website, thorncoyle.com, THORNCOYLE.com. And you can access my essays, short stories, all my books, a bunch of other stuff on there. There's also links to my Teachable page where I do still teach some online classes. Social media, I spend time on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Facebook and Instagram, I post essays and short stories and a daily photograph or a daily thought. I share interesting stuff. and I do book announcements. Twitter, there's a lot more variety. Twitter is actually my primary social media platform. So you get a wider variety. You'll get more social justice stuff, things that are going on, mutual aid activity, weird, interesting articles, and all the other stuff I post on Instagram and Facebook too. So my Twitter feed has a lot more variety. If you don't want that, then stick to Facebook or Instagram. But yeah, the main portal is my website. I also have a Patreon, and I do a weekly Substack newsletter that I really encourage people to sign up for, because I do a weekly just musings, my thoughts and a photograph. And then at the very bottom, I'll do book announcements, or if something's on sale, that sort of thing. I really try to keep it engaging though. It's not a sales document. It actually is another way to try to connect to people as these social media platforms get weirder and weirder.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on to my Substack. So you can find that on my website also, or just look for me on Substack.
Perfect.
And the wonderful Steve Talks Books. How do we, what's the best place to get a hold of you? What's your preferred platform? Things like that.
You can find me on pagechewing.com. It's our forum and a calendar. We have all our events there. On Twitter, Steve Talks Books. I'm also on Vero. That's my limit, how much I can handle with social media. That's enough for me. What about you, PL?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. However, predominantly, just as Thorn said, Twitter is my preferred social media platform by far. My website is www.plstore.com. That's where more book related. You can find up on books, what's coming next, new releases about the current books I have out. With Steve on his, Steve has posts some amazing content, and there's a lot of different avenues in terms of content. I'm on the page chewing one, and we're into the 20s now with our episodes, so which is incredible. But we thank you so much. Yeah, it's all due to Steve. This is his channel. He invited me to be his co-host. I'm so honored, and the joy of it is working with Steve and getting to meet and get to know more about fantastic creatives such as Thorn. So it's been an absolute treasure. I can't forget quickly before we go that Steve and I are both bloggers with the wonderful beforewegoblog.com, www.beforewegoblog.com, led by the incredible Beth Tabler. And check that out for content reviews, mostly predominantly sci-fi, horror, and fantasy, but they delve into comics and graphic, all kinds of great stuff. So, beforewegoblog.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Thorn, for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and hope to do it again. But I feel like we just scratched the surface on all the questions we wanted to ask. But
I do feel like we could have talked for another hour.
Yeah, for sure. But we'll have you back though one day, so then we can pick that up.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you both so much, and thanks to everyone who was watching and listening.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And all the links that we mentioned will be down below in the description, whether it's on the podcast or on YouTube. I'll add those in here shortly. So have a good day, everybody.
Bye.